New York Yankees, World Series champions. New York City back on top, outperforming all comers in reducing violent crime. But the shine of a newfound confidence is being tarnished, not by criminals, but by the police. This Bronx courthouse will soon see the trial of 4 white cops who shot an unarmed black man 41 times. The charge is murder. Now New Yorkers are marching against the very police who are claiming credit for reducing murders by over 100 per month.
The eyes of the world are looking at New York and the atrocities that are happening here.
Everybody's worried about the cops. They're like the biggest gang in New York now.
These 4 guys did not go out there to assassinate this man. 38, 39, 41, 41.
You wouldn't face 41 bullets on a firing squad.
A VIP flies into New York at the expense of the city's all-powerful mayor, Rudy Giuliani. He wants her on side. He gets more than he bargains for.
As soon as our plane landed here, they said, "Identify yourself, Mrs. Diallo." I said, "Yes, it's me." I saw at a distance 8 or 10 cars from the police with all these lights flashing. I said, "How come the police killed my son and they want to take me?"
Mrs. Diallo, her son Amadou's body lying in a city mortuary, was escorted to a Fifth Avenue hotel and asked to wait for a visit next day from Mayor Giuliani.
I'm saying, oh my God, the city officials are probably trying to indoctrinate her to their side of the story, have photo ops with the mayor, and try to turn this whole question of brutality around.
On his arrival, the mayor was kept waiting an hour and left without meeting the strong-minded businesswoman who had her own agenda.
I told them I needed to have my own hotel. They said, "No, the city want to take you in charge."
She said to me, "I've been taken by the police. I feel like I'm a hostage. I don't want any help from the city. They killed my son. Would you help me?"
Amadou Diallo's parents say they hope their son did not die in vain.
Over the ensuing weeks, the grieving mother's voice would help Al Sharpton, the outspoken community leader, escalate his long-running war of words with the mayor over police brutality. Sharpton had ensured the media was there to deliver maximum impact when Mrs. Diallo visited the spot where her son was killed.
He wanted to do his own dream. That's why he came to America. I have lost the most important person in my life. I'm not going to forget my son.
"22-year-old Amadou Diallo had paid a late-night visit to a corner shop close to his Bronx home. He was mistaken for a serial rapist by 4 plainclothes officers from the Street Crimes Unit. They tracked him in an unmarked vehicle, believing he was acting suspiciously. Police would later claim he ignored shouts to put his hands up. Reaching into his pocket, probably for his ID or keys, proved fatal. All 4 officers opened fire. 2 carried on firing until their clips were empty. 41 bullets in all, 19 hits, all over in a matter of seconds.
A Bronx resident is dead after shots fired here on Wheeler Avenue early Thursday morning.
Gunshots, a whole bunch of gunshots. Just kept on going. And then we looked out the window, we just saw the police officer, the detective. He was out here. He was just shaking.
Police would later say that one officer had fallen backwards, leading his colleagues to think he'd been shot. Deep-rooted tension between the police and the Bronx community meant this killing was never going to go unnoticed.
Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, a member of the Community Affairs Unit of the New York City Police Department called to tell me it's all right, they have it under control. Now, they never called me. So I said, well, this is strange. For them to call me, this must be really bad.
Within hours, Amadou Diallo's house had become an impromptu shrine and a focal point for anger against the police. Anger which only amplified after the results of an independent autopsy became known. Forensic tests suggested Amadou had been fired on even though he'd fallen after the first few bullets had struck him. The police insist he remained on his feet. The popular perception was that this was nothing short of an execution. Answers were called for.
Many here want to know why the 4 police officers responsible for killing Amadou Diallo have not yet been questioned.
The size of the crowds gathering in Wheeler Avenue spoke for themselves. As Al Sharpton rallied protesters, the man ultimately in charge of the New York Police Department, Mayor Giuliani, made little comment about the shooting. He refused absolutely to criticize police tactics. Blaming legitimate anger on media hype infuriated many people. He appeared to be turning his back on the protesters.
Instead of fanning the flames of people's frustration, somebody in a calm and deliberate way should be telling them that the investigation will take a long time because it should be careful.
The mayor could be forgiven for thinking he could ride out the storm. Although only a subway ride away, downtown Manhattan can seem a world apart from the Bronx. Once notorious for high levels of street crime, robberies and assaults are down 50%. For visitors like me, it's as if there's been a cultural revolution in the Big Apple.
What's your name? Is it Barry or Sue? What's your name? What's your name? Do I stand a chance with you?
Putting New York back on the tracks was part and parcel of Mayor Giuliani's zero-tolerance campaign. Times Square, a symbol of the high life, had long been a low-life haven. The mayor targeted so-called quality-of-life crimes, cleaning beggars, junkies and squeegee boys out of Manhattan. For tourists and New Yorkers, it's made the city their kind of town again.
You have my personal commitment that I will not rest until we drive drugs out of this city. No more heroin, no more cocaine, no more marijuana.
Basically rode the platform that I am going to civilize the city, I am going to drive crime down. And once the police decided that those people were not going to stand on street corners and basically more than harass, virtually menace people, and that tide began to change, then every single person, and there are tens of thousands every day in New York who were getting accosted, that part of their life disappeared. And by design, the quality of their life every morning improved.
I got mobbed about 10 times. Since Giuliani is in that government, I didn't get mobbed once, right? That's a plain fact.
You can see right here, a day like this, a lot of people are out. On the weekends, this entire place is packed. I mean, not only with tourists, but also local New Yorkers who come in and enjoy it. You know, it's especially late at night, you know, when you're coming out of theaters.
5-10 years ago, there'd be a chain snatching, it was commonplace. You'd see people just running down the block, shaking a chain or something like that. Now that's practically unheard of.
Much better.
100 blocks further north, on the same street, it's another story. It's not difficult to find people in Harlem who share a different perspective on the crackdown on crime, in particular of a higher police presence.
Well, they just stopped us for no reason. They had some alleged reason that they was chasing some guy that carjacked somebody and they couldn't find him. So they took the two nearest people there that was there. That was me and my friend. They put my friend in the hospital, handcuffed him to the bed. You know, he had fractured ribs, threw me on the floor, kicked me, put my hat on my face, screamed racial slurs. Everybody's worried about the cops. They're like the biggest gang in New York now.
Disney taking over 42nd Street now. This is where there's more safety. As far as in the neighborhoods like this here, they couldn't care less whether we knock each other off, and they just come in and clean up the mess. They just come in and clean up.
During a late-night game of touchball outside their home in 1994, Anthony Byers and his brothers encountered the type of overzealous cop who would focus concerns on just what zero tolerance meant in places like the Bronx. Their ball hit a parked patrol car. At first, the officer ignored it. The second time, tolerance was the last thing on his mind.
Officer Lavoti came out and was like infuriated. He was cursing at us, bad-mouthing us, straight out, you know. Not one word that came out of his mouth wasn't good. It was all curses and, you know, it was real bad. He literally came up to one of my youngest brother and said, "Do you want to fight?" He's trying to grab Tony's hands to put him behind to handcuff him. Voti grabbed him around his neck and pulled him back. And from at that time, I said like a couple of seconds or whatever, as I started backing away, I'm looking at him, pulling my brother back. At that time, I saw my father come out saying, "What happened? What's going on?"
"What you doing? You're choking him, you're killing him. Leave him alone. He's asthmatic." When Tony went to the floor, he closed his eyes. Tony was begging for air, like gasping for air.
Anthony died. A post-mortem showed his asthma wasn't to blame. He'd been killed by brute force.
My kids, I mean, they were never, they're still to this day in shock that it was a policeman that murdered their brother. You know, they're still, you know, like in daze. I'm in daze because our reputation here with the police was like we were friends.
Officer Lavoti was allowed back on duty. Although homicide rates were falling, there was a growing feeling that zero tolerance gave cops a license to harass. Predominantly white undercover officers of the elite street crimes unit began roaming mostly black and Latino neighborhoods. After initial success, the unit was tripled in size. While 4 times as many people were stopped, the number of arrests went down.
They come in like an outside occupying force. They come in like sportsmen hunting a live game. I was on a talk show in Staten Island, and a white policeman who lived upstate says, "I come in the jungle every day and try to soothe the beasts."
If a person shifts his eyes, or is wearing his cap sideways, or the seat of his trousers are down around his knees, as many youngsters wear pants these days, that's not sufficient reason to believe that this person is about to commit a crime or has a weapon. You know, driving while black is an offense here in New York.
The people of Harlem are no strangers to controversy and confrontation. For 50 years, civil rights campaigns have been launched from pulpits in this part of town. Since the death of Anthony Byers, concern over aggressive and brutal police behaviour has been carefully marshalled by the Reverend Al Sharpton, ministering the issue whilst others marvelled at the reduction in crime attributed to Mayor Giuliani's policies.
You know, I grew up in the ghetto. Sometimes you could smell a dead rat before you could find it. And you can spray all the air freshener you want until you find the dead rat and get rid of it. It's going to keep stinking until somebody...
He's an always evolving man, at least in his public persona. You know, his history is a bit more checkered. He has run-ins with being half a con man, involved in ticket scams and seizing on to flashpoint racial issues, largely to aggrandize himself, some people say, which raises the questions whether he wants to heal racial strife in New York or if he wants to benefit by the fissures that exist between people.
19 bullets in Amadou.
Al Sharpton is a self-styled agent provocateur. Along with dozens of others, the Byers and Diallo tragedies have helped him transform a civil rights concern into a mainstream one. On this issue, even many of his critics think he's right.
You can't preach restraint to the children and then act like there is a rationale to shoot an unarmed man 41 times. Hello.
Abner Louima speaks about surviving the torture.
As if chokings and shootings weren't enough, the case of Abner Louima outraged even the most hardened of police supporters. He was beaten up and sodomized inside a police station with what was thought to be a toilet plunger. In court this week, Officer Justin Volpe finally admitted the crime after denying it for 2 years.
When they take me to the bathroom and they just threw me to the ground, start beat me up, and then one of them, that was 2 of them. One pick up something in the floor, I don't know what it is, but it looked like a plunger to me.
When the assault took place 2 years ago, the anger it generated was spontaneous. After the Diallo shooting this February, people were more inclined to believe Sharpton when he said there was a fully fledged crisis in the NYPD.
Now, you're not talking about a policeman now that is even claiming he was in danger and shot. You're talking about an act of hate and vengeance and an absolute abuse of power. I mean, some things, a judgment call. Cop thought it was a gun, so he shoots once. You can debate that. But a plunge up someone's rectum? 41 shots at an unarmed man? Where is there just bad judgment at?
Byers, Louima and now Diallo. Al Sharpton's campaign was building. He moved it downtown to the eye of the storm, NYPD HQ. An array of headline-grabbing personalities were amongst the 1,100 people arrested over 15 days. Mayor Giuliani called them the worst elements of society.
That Monday we started going to jail. I would pace them. By the end of the week, I started getting calls from congressmen, Jewish groups, people that never have worked with me, some people that were hostile to me. The ex-mayor of New York, Dave Dinkins.
The civil disobedience employed at One Police Plaza, very intentional, so as to be arrested, to focus attention on the problem.
No peace, no justice, no peace.
The overwhelming number of women and men in the NYPD are good, honest, hardworking people, courageous, who put their lives on the line every day for the rest of us. But there's some of them who are mean, who are brutal, who are cruel, indeed who are criminal.
I wanted to find out more about the Street Crimes Unit, that had done so much to make New York safer and yet aroused such passion and anger. Promises of cooperation from the NYPD's publicity department proved worthless. They were in a bunker. Which was strange, really, because they actually have a good story to tell. We got in via the back door, so to speak. Terry Gillespie said she'd show me around Street Crime HQ. No one would throw her out. Her son Kevin served with the unit and died in a shootout in the Bronx.
It was his job, as is the job of the others in the street crime unit, to get guns off the street, illegal firearms, to make the neighborhood safer. And they've taken, as you can see, thousands and thousands of guns.
In fact, several thousand seized in just 7 years are proudly displayed like trophies, including a significant number taken by the officers now facing trial for the Diallo murder. The list of arrests speaks for itself, but with 4 street crimes officers killed on duty, this is not a job for the faint-hearted.
My son gave his life as part of the unit. That night he went out to the Bronx. He stopped a car that had been reported as stolen. They recovered 4 guns from that. Was it worth the 4 guns? To lose my son? Well, not to me. There's never a safe time for these cops, never. There's not 1 minute of safety from the time that they leave their home base until they pull back at night and get ready to go home. When you look at this, you can see how a misfortune, I mean, Mrs. Diallo was suffering. I know her suffering. I do feel the same kind of pain that she does.
But I want to take you down here to the Brevoort projects. They were pretty busy when we were down here.
While Terry's son got guns off the street, Kenny Mullins dealt with those that were left. He took me on a tour of the tough 81st precinct in Bedford-Stuyvesant, where he worked until he retired after being injured on duty.
This was bad. This was all a lot of Rastafarians over here with Jamaican drug markets. You had the posses, you had different factions fighting each other. You know, one side of the street would be fighting with the other side, and when there were guns out, you know how to enforce that. They come up and they'll shoot you.
How do the police intervene in those kind of
well,
drug wars?
You know, for the most part, we're picking up the bodies. If we got called on a job, I would not come in here unless we had 2 units here, 4 police officers. When you pull up here, you feel outnumbered. You feel outnumbered. You know, they used to pull some tricks down here too. They would take double-sided tape and put razor blades in them, and then stick the double-sided tape underneath the handle of your car door. So when you came back out of a job and you put your hand to open your car door, you'd cut your fingers open. They would do that to the police officers down here.
In 1996, Kenny and his partner got a call and a clear description of an armed man roaming their patch.
As we got out of the car, he pulled a revolver from his waistband, looked at us, and then turned and ran. He ran down this alley and jumped into the bushes. I chased behind him. My partner was on the other side of the bushes. So when he jumped through the bushes, he saw my partner. He jumped back through the bushes, and I was standing there ready. He came to a gun first, and I shot him. I didn't point at him. I didn't aim. I literally didn't. I just had my gun in my hand, and it literally went bang. It was right here. See this? See this alley right down there? All I thought about was my kids. And believe me, I did a lot of thinking for the next couple of days. Do I want to come back to this job? Believe me.
Kenny says he wouldn't do the job now. There's too much public mistrust.
Fear is spreading in New York today.
Police, open up.
Concern over brutality. Mr. Giuliani, we need meaningful reform to stop police corruption and brutality.
Come on, open up.
So when our kids see a police officer, they'll see a friend, not an enemy.
Cops feel they're getting a bad break with such propaganda. Their achievements unappreciated by a cynical public. Kenny and other retirees told me ordinary beat officers feel increasingly isolated.
All right.
Even their families are giving them a hard time over the alleged excessive use of force in the Diallo case.
Where is the righteousness in it? Where is the silent majority? When are they going to come out and stop this? Because I firmly believe that, you know, that Al Sharpton does not speak for the black community. I feel he speaks for a small segment of it. Certainly, I feel there's a silent majority who's just sitting back saying, well, that's not what I believe. That's not what I believe.
Pulling out your gun's part of being a policeman. It's a shitty part, but that happens to be part of it. And believe me when I tell you, I don't know anybody who's ever proud of taking out their gun, you know?
You have to make split-minute decisions. And everyone thinks it's so easy. It's not. It's not at all. You gotta wait for a boss to tell you to shoot your gun. You gotta wait for your partner to start screaming.
The New York homicide rate has plummeted. Do you think that NYPD got the credit for that?
Sure they did.
No,
the cops
Everybody took credit. Everybody took credit for guns off the street, robberies, burglaries, and homicides all down. I mean, plummeted, like you said, plummeted. They all took the credit, but then when all of a sudden, when this one guy up in the Bronx was killed in a tragic, horrible accident. Now it's, oh wait, you're starting to violate our rights here. What's going on?
933 guns seized by the Street Crimes Unit last year alone.
That's fine, and we applaud that, and they should continue to do that. But that does not mean that we want you to take weapons off the street and then take your weapons and shoot us down in cold blood.
But this is just cop bashing, isn't it?
They're cop bashing because they are trying to cover up the few, which makes the whole look bad. That's like if 4 blacks shot an unarmed person of another color 41 times, and I say, if you question them 4 blacks that shot him, you're black bashing. That's ludicrous. Most blacks don't shoot people 41 times unarmed, and most cops don't. And they need to quit jiving, and let's deal with the bad apples and get them out of here.
No police! No justice! No police! No justice!
Fed up with relentless claims of brutality and racism, several hundred police packed the forecourt of the Bronx courthouse, where 4 colleagues were to become the first serving officers to be charged with murder. Mrs. Diallo, arriving for the hearing with Al Sharpton, was greeted by her own supporters, narrowly separated from angry protesting policemen. After the indictment, no apologies, just words for their supporters.
I'd like to thank the officers of New York City for their undaunted support. The members of the Street Crime Unit, stand your heads proud.
I love my fellow brothers, that's it.
I did nothing wrong, and this trial will show that I did nothing wrong, and I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate the support that's been shown today. I'm not guilty of any crimes.
There's been a boost for the anti-brutality campaign from an unexpected quarter.
I've been stopped several times. I've been given a story that I'm fitting the description of someone, you know, yada yada. And I've been told that I had tail lights out, brake lights out, just as an excuse to stop me. And it happens all the time.
Terence Wansley believes many white cops find it difficult to distinguish between black people and criminals. He speaks from experience. He's an NYPD detective. Not only has he been harassed off duty, but was nearly shot by his own side on duty.
One night we go out, it's late in the evening, we go out into a drug-prone area, an arrest goes down, a buy goes down. This particular officer was supposed to move in and effect an arrest, while myself and the undercover officer were supposed to flee and leave the subject, the drug seller, out there to be arrested. They chased me instead of the drug seller and pulled their weapons on me. And this person, it was so frightening for me because their hand was trembling and the weapon was in my face. And I felt that I was going to be killed that night. And they couldn't make the distinction that I was the person that they worked with for 5 or 6 years. I was the person that just passed them the ketchup and the mustard only a couple hours ago. And that's very frightening because all they saw was a black male. If that kind of mistake can be made with somebody that you work with for 5 years or 4 years, you can imagine what kind of mistakes can be made on civilians.
That's why Wansley's campaign group, 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, made up of police and prison officers, both serving and retired, runs workshops in how to survive a police encounter.
You all are aware of what happened in February with Amadou Diallo, right? You're aware of what happened with Anthony Baez in the Bronx, okay?
Pupils are asked to tell the class about their own experiences with the police.
We want you live and real, but this is serious. We're not doing comedy. What happened in your case?
Now, I just was chilling in the staircase of my building, and the cops, and they heard the guys making some noise, and we wasn't really making no noise, and the cops stopped me, and he pulled a gun on me and all that, so.
What happened, officer?
The group do role play to show how routine incidents can escalate into violence on either side. Remember, this is what children think might happen.
Why you got your gun out, officer? All that for?
He said, step out the car.
He said our taillight is out and you're going to take your gun out like
yes,
that?
because he's giving me problems. Step out the car.
What kind of problem? This is my car. How you giving?
You step out the car.
How many of us think that the 2 police officers were doing their job the right way?
I said, yeah, they did the right thing, but if it was the real cops, they would have shot them.
You think they would have shot them?
Yeah.
More police officers are killed throughout this country doing vehicle stops than any other way. The engine is off, the interior light is on. The driver keeps his or her hands on the steering wheel. The passenger in the front seat has their hands out at the dashboard. Keep your voice moderately low, be pleasant with the officer. This is the way you take control of the situation. Even if the officer has a bad attitude, he may come up and he'll get there and well, what can I say?
Try and reduce white cops' fear of you because you're black is the message. More controversially, they tell the children, don't automatically trust cops, don't take part in lineups, and don't volunteer information if stopped.
You say nothing else. Name, address, date of birth, telephone number. You say nothing else. You understand?
One of the young men said earlier, well, I'm not no chump. We're telling you, 100 blacks in law enforcement who care about you, we love y'all. And we want y'all to understand that we don't want anything to happen to you, like what happened to Amadou, what happened to Louima.
We're not making a blanket indictment of all police officers by no means, but those who in fact do have malicious intent in their heart can change your life if you encounter them. Some police officers believe that they're on a divine mission from God, and they believe that mission is to clean up the scourge of the community, and they see everybody or too many people as that scourge. When the truth of the matter is, there's only a very small percentage of individuals of any race committing the vast majority of crimes. And unfortunately, they haven't developed the ability to distinguish those people.
Commissioner Howard Safer, the man accused of bungling this crisis, is summoned before city councillors to answer criticism of his street crimes unit. He cancelled the last meeting after Diallo was killed, a clash of engagements. He was then seen on camera at the Oscars.
We take very seriously the concerns that have been expressed about how we do our jobs, particularly with respect to street crime encounters, street encounters with people of color.
His attempt to explain the unit's successes are undermined by a forced admission that just 3% of its members are black, half that of 5 years ago. His critics don't hold back.
We feel that people, citizens, are being harassed and stopped, and children are being brought up to be afraid of the police, basically because of the street crimes unit. I suggest
Is there a question here?
Yes, there's going to be a question, so please just wait for it. I am asking if you cannot find a different way of reducing crime or keeping the crime statistics low without threatening people's civil liberties. And that, I believe, is what's happened with the street crimes unit.
Was that when did I stop beating my wife? I guess the question I have to ask is, at what level of increase do we go back to the kind of success that we're having now? When we have 10 more murders, 20 more murders, 40 more murders, 100 more murders, 100,000 more cars stolen, 50,000 more cars stolen? The fact is that this police department is committed to community policing and also committed to crime reduction as well.
When the commissioner picked up his numbers and left, it was the turn of Eric Adams, the founder of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement, to address councillors. He was accompanied by a hooded figure, an officer who'd recently left the street crimes unit and supported the criticism from within the ranks.
Too many people have the false definition of a criminal. According to that definition, the countless numbers of times I was stopped, or even better yet, stand up, Darren. This is a criminal. 6 foot, black, dreadlocks. That's the profile. Driving a Lexus, he's going to jail. Thank goodness for him, he has a lieutenant's shield in his pocket. Even after identifying himself, the problem still exists. That's a criminal to too many people.
Next, the hooded officer's testimony was read out to protect her identity.
My life in the New York City Police Department Street Crime Unit is a living example of how a police department could lose control of the basic principle of civil rights. What they are omitting from their stats are the number of lives we left shattered due to our war on people of color that is camouflaged by our war on crime.
She said black officers were unwelcome and there was little race training. The following day, and despite her good conduct reports, Officer Yvette Wharton was sacked. Pure coincidence, say NYPD, that was simply due to her poor attendance and disciplinary record. The struggle of the Byers family to get justice for the death of Anthony showed it's not just individual rogue officers that are at fault, but the very system itself. Despite eventually paying out $3 million in damages to Anthony's wife, NYPD stubbornly protected their own. The family had to go to extraordinary lengths to gather evidence to put Anthony's killer behind bars.
We put out an 800 number for anybody who got information on this cop can please call us with any information. And then they started calling the number like fleas and honey. People were telling us all kinds of stories that this man abused the community. So we took it down to the DA's office, and he wouldn't see us. So we worked up a strategy where we took over the DA's office. And once we took over the DA's office, we said, we're not going to leave.
Their fears of a cover-up were confirmed when their lawyer discovered Officer Lavote had used a chokehold on another youth, broken a civilian's jaw, and even assaulted a fellow officer.
We were able to get really inside the NYPD and get the files out on Lavote. And what we learned is that in the face of 15 excessive force complaints, in the face of being in a special monitoring program because he had so many complaints against him, in the face of his own commander in 1991 recommending that he be taken out of the precinct and given a desk job because he was so violent, he was still allowed to stay in the position of power. He was protected, and ultimately he was allowed to hurt a lot of people.
During his trial, it became clear Lavote and some of the other officers on call that night had cobbled together a story to justify Anthony's death. The judge said Lavote had clearly lied. He was still acquitted. Eventually, he went to jail for 7 years on federal civil rights charges, despite being protected by senior officers.
This is really where the focus of all the problems, in my opinion, lie not so much with the cop on the street, but the message that's being sent from the top, the covering up that's being done at the top, and the protection that exists at the top. And if that doesn't change, then we can all really forget about ever having any kind of accountability for the officer on the beat if those superiors at the top don't enforce the law.
Last month, in the biggest march of its kind in New York, protesters, including Iris Baez, called for reform, for more black and Latino cops and proper independent scrutiny of the NYPD.
When they murdered my son for playing football, I didn't believe it, that it was a cop. I didn't believe that in New York City this could happen. We can take these people, we can make them demand. We're not begging, we're not asking for favors, we're demanding that you change the system.
The death of Amadou Diallo has crystallized New Yorkers' anxiety over zero-tolerance policing. They're watching for signs of a shift in Mayor Giuliani's priorities and an NYPD, they say, offering protection and fairness. Stopping ever larger numbers of people at random may sometimes result in guns being seized, although more often than not, it merely provokes anger. It's a balancing act. Officers are being trained to show politeness and respect, but arrests dropped 60% after the Diallo incident, and beat cops complain their commanders don't know how to deal with the backlash.
I can just imagine if these police officers are convicted, what that's going to do to the morale of every police officer in New York City. Every radio run they go on, when they open that door, I think when you come down on a large scale, it's going to mean a big difference between life and death in New York City, and a quality of life in New York City.
You're going to go back to having these 4,000 homicides, 2,000 more a year, every year. I don't think that's right, and I don't think it's necessary.
The answers lie with Rudy Giuliani. Since Diallo, he's been weakened. His popularity rating has hit rock bottom. NYPD, his most visible asset, may now be turning into a visible liability. With the impending trial of the 4 Diallo cops, and with Hillary Clinton cruising around town, a real rival to the mayor's Senate ambitions, he knows his political future is on the line. His predecessor has some straightforward advice.
We have a constitution. People died to give us the laws that we have. And to violate them willy-nilly simply because someone decides that they're going to be judge and jury is just not our law. It's not our system of jurisprudence, nor should it be.
That's all very well, but just how should New York be policed then?
It should be policed in a legal fashion. It's really not very complicated.
The world has watched New York clean up its act, even tried to emulate its achievements on crime. Now there's a real risk that many of these gains could be swept away in a zero-tolerance backlash.